Hey guys, continuing with the previous chat, I had to edit a rude word at the end of the last talk because I was getting a bit sort of hot round the collar. So I was talking about the kind of social crisis that I think that we're in, and I think it's actually directly traceable to metaphysics and materialistic metaphysics. And I'll explain why I think that trickles all the way through to the kind of leaves of the tree of life, which is individual humans and so on. So so basically in the kind of 1900s, we were slowly but surely doing away with the church. We're doing away with mysticism and really getting to grips with kind of physical reality, if you like, the space time, right? And Newton, Einstein, all the massive advances in physics and thermodynamics, and which leads to engines and industry and mass production, right? All of which we could, you could put a positive spin on and say, wow, it's amazing. It's, allows human invention, construction, and so on and so forth. You could even you could talk positively about the massive amounts of wealth being concentrated in small areas, because you could say, well, that allows purchasing labour to build great projects of industry and so on and so forth. So there's all sorts of angles of attack on this stuff. But the key message for me is that really we've been teaching children some of this kind of scientistic narrative. This idea that science is now the new god, and this new god is without meaning, without purpose. We're an accident. We're a random chance event in an empty, sort of cold cosmos, right? So that message is conveyed kind of quite subtly through our political theory, our economic theories, our scientific teachings and philosophical teachings. To the extent that when I think I've discussed this elsewhere, but very briefly, when I went to university, I would say that the vast majority of the philosophy lecturers there were probably materialist atheists, right? And certainly logical positivist, which, as I've said elsewhere, just kind of wipes the table clean of all metaphysical inquiry and any sort of insight-driven or speculative mysticism or even philosophical rationalism about the nature of reality was just completely frowned upon, right? So, we had our we had the magic kicked out of us, right? And that's such a tragic thing. As a kind of, I think there's something kind of fundamentally, perhaps a little bit romantic about me and my soul and my experience here in the world. And so that's an absolute death knell for romantic, imaginative thinking about the nature of reality. Now the thing is, it's only thought of as romantic and imaginative because it so obviously breaches the hard sort of cast iron logic of materialism. And it's taken me a long time to sort of get to this place of kind of certainty that certainty that materialism is wrong, right? And I think that can be demonstrated with logic, and even, as I've suggested elsewhere, with emerging revolutions in science. And I mean way past quantum physics and way past some even modern biology and DNA and genetics and so on. So way past all of that. And I think these new scientific insights are giving us glimpses of a more meaningful universe. But nevertheless, we've still got this kind of backdrop of materialism, which I think just sort of needs unraveling. We at least need to get to a place where people are kind of aware that they're in a narrative, that they're inside a kind of a scientific or philosophical paradigm, because that's the first issue, really. And again, it goes back to the theme of ignorance is not bliss, that people don't recognize that the very language that they're using, which they've inherited, right, from their precedents and the society that they've emerged into, right? In fact, the existentialists, is it Sartre, they say that we're sort of flung into the world, right? Again, it seems to sort of support this individuated narrative where, instead of being a foliation of a large system, leaves on a tree, we're thought of as just the leaf, right? That's just helplessly just kind of flung into this world as a kind of scared mammal. And then, for the existentialist, then the pursuit of sort of authenticity and kind of self-direction and so on becomes all the harder. I sort of relate to some of what they're saying. But for me, it's the idea that we've boxed ourselves in, right? And we sort of think of ourselves as these isolated, kind of dark chambers of self that nobody can sort of access from outside, because and that can be very isolating. And so perhaps we seek certain sorts of social comforts to offset that kind of loss. So we may seek sort of intimacy with people to try to kind of manage that sense of separation and to feel connected. And that's really interesting. And I think that the way that our social structures have changed, and how the natural tribe that, like I say, these modern human bodies have lived in for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years, before extremely recent radical changes in our social structure. Let's sort of continue thinking about this this state of affairs, this thing I'm calling a crisis. And I'm calling it a crisis because we're still having international sort of barbaric wars. We're having wars internally with ourselves because of things like mental health. We've got people, suicide rates are increasing among young men as well, of all groups. The group that you might traditionally expect to be vibrant and active and positive and forward-looking, they're committing suicide at increasing rates in a number of different countries across the world. So it's not just a sort of localized post-industrial phenomena. This is seen across boundaries. Not to downplay the suicides of our young women. The key message here is that society isn't working for us as individuals, as groups. It just freaking isn't working. I mean, just down to the very basic management of our economy. That's a total misnomer. Economics. You think, well, what does economy mean? Economizing. It means, making good use of the things that you find, the things that the everyday folks leave behind, and sort of wobbling along and respecting the materials and the products that you possess, and seeing these artifacts as hugely gifts, right? I mean, there's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance talked about this. I mean, I'm not one to obsess about objects and machines and so on and so forth for reasons you'll probably suspect, but there was a beauty in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I'd recommend that book because it talked about respecting that motorcycle and taking charge of ownership of it and polishing, looking after its components and making sure it lasted, right? And finding a sort of inner peace within that program. Hence the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's obviously the consumeristic mentality of modern, certainly Western humans, is quite the opposite of that. It's just like, well, we'll just, your TV's broken, or even if it's not broken, you just replace it with another one. The cost of production of things have been driven down all the time by this competitive capitalist model that we have. I mean, it's amazing how many businesses collapse within this model. You wonder how how do they keep just turning up? So it's sort of venture capital and so on, isn't it? We've got television, which is essentially telling our citizens to sort of marry, reproduce, consume, get themselves into debt, just be content with their lot and bring forward the next generation, obviously hand them over to the state sort of behavioural model fairly quickly. When they're about 5 or 6, most parents are relieved, frankly. Here's some radical views on parenting and child rearing and so on. I mean, I just think it's absolutely crazy that we give the responsibility of child rearing to our children, sort of 18 to 25-year-olds, sort of burdened with the responsibilities of childcare, having to pay the bills, their earliest sort of foray into the adult world. Probably getting themselves in debt and all sorts of trouble, when really these are the guys that should be kind of, I don't know, building our society, or hunting if you go back far enough, or I don't know. It just seems crazy, and they don't have the wisdom either to rear children. I mean, hence the importance of grandparents and aunties and uncles and so on. And obviously we do still have these family ties. I'm not saying that we're all living in dark, isolated chambers here, but I'm just saying that those ties are being slowly eroded by changes in our society and culture and so So, none of that's very good for the soul, I don't think. And I think nationalism as well is something else that's, again, come along for the ride. I mean, nationalism. I would say I'm sort of more of a region. I mean, I'm sort of more of a regionalist. I recognise the sort of historicities, the traditions, and so on, and the regional character of certain peoples. Right? There is a thing called France. There's a thing called French people, and or although equally there is also this stereotype aspect to national identity as well, which can be unhelpful. But at the same time, it's just a reality. There are certain distinct languages associated with regions, cultures, practices, religions, and so on. And so it's undeniable that there are regional identities, right? So I'm not denying that, and I think it'd be crazy to deny that. But at the same time, I think nationalism is something more than just that. It's a control function. I mean, for me, borders are generally defined by two sets of bullies agreeing that they've exhausted their supply of effort at that point, and I'll just say, what, let's just agree on a dividing line between our two imperial territories. And I mean, this is how the borders were founded. The very founding of countries wasn't by popular vote or or some it wasn't really sort of done democratically. It was done by the hard iron fist of domination and autocracy. I don't think there's no bloodier history than the histories of nations. And so many of them sort of define themselves in this kind of at least semi sort of militarized kind of warrior-like cultures, and the parades and the celebration of the fallen and the victories and the defeats and the kind of the endless reminders to all of us that that we owe our lives to these warriors that have died for our freedom and so on and so forth, which I am not denying. And I, of course, feel huge sympathy for those. I mean, my own grandfather fought in D-Day and saw his friends of his fall. And of course, the Nazis were a particularly nasty, bad bunch of guys, and no, you cannot stand for that kind of behaviour. Yeah, I mean, this is complex stuff now, getting into war, but I want to say that whilst I admire the courage and the bravery of those that have fought in these horrible wars, and I deeply sympathise with them and their experience and their families and so on. I do feel that there's a relationship between this pattern behaviour, mass war, and so on, and the emergence of materialism as a paradigm in human culture. Now, you might say this is all, there's fuck all we can do about it. It's just the way things are. I disagree with that because I believe in free will, and I mean, it's those people in the past that have believed in their imagination, was scoffed at. I mean, even the first guy. Apparently, look, this is hilarious, right? The first person in London to pop an umbrella and say, look, it's pissing down in London, as it nearly always is. I'm going to use this umbrella thing. And this person had stones thrown at them and spat on, and like it was the tool of the devil and stuff, because of course everyone was pissed off that they were getting rained on. But lo and behold, following week, 10 more people being spat on and stoned, 20 more, until it gathered enough force that it was the mainstream, right? So someone's vision and bravery and courage to say, I'm going to pop an umbrella, led to a massive advance in London living. So change is possible, right? Revolutions have happened. Quite a number of countries have kicked out their imperial rulers. They've kicked out their aristocracy, possibly replaced them with some other virtual sort of aristocracy, and not necessarily a clean as a whistle power structure, but it's led to improvements in conditions for workers and conditions in cities and so on and so forth. I mean, we wouldn't have had things like the NHS without political struggle and rebellion against the old hierarchies who just by their very definition just cling to the power structures that support their position. You can't blame them. It's not like I'm saying these guys are inhuman monsters. It's just, the direction of travel of their families, their heritage, their histories, has produced what they are. So it's not like they're an object of evil. They're just another part of us. We are all one, and that again just supports my notion that we should be able to communicate as one. And I think that philosophy is one of the routes into being able to do that. By kind of by looking at our separate societies, structures, and apparently on the surface distinct customs and so on, and recognizing the commonalities and saying, well, here actually, underlying all of this, there is this central set of archetypes you could suggest with dotted lines to Carl Jung there, that guide all of us. And so no matter where you are, Alaska, Polynesia, Africa, you will see the same sort of dynamics, pressures, drives for security, protection, shelter, running water, and a fundamental kind of sort of model of being human. You might expect to find, if an advanced alien sort of wrote an animal encyclopedia, sort of zoological analysis of this earth, they might have a chapter on humans and say, well, here's the archetypal behaviours and their habits and habitats and so on. And I think there is some kind of central model that you can say is common to all of us. And it's understanding that and seeing that these apparent acts of evil and corruption and chaos and so on and so forth, even they have their place. And whilst we might necessarily have to respond with a moral program, and one that has to be brought to bear at some point if we're to make any progress, we have to acknowledge that there are unjust acts going on in society and respond accordingly. I mean, some might say that we have a court system, we have a judiciary, an institution for the judiciary, and that's progress, and it is some sort of progress. And you can point towards ancient philosophical influences for these things as well, and Plato's Republic and so on. So, I think we're in a bit of a mess. We sort of sit our kids. I mean, I've done it myself. I'm a parent of two girls and they're teenagers now, and for a sort of an easy life, sometimes you sort of pop them in front of the TV, and we sort of buy the convenience meals, and you sort of very much sort of plug into the sort of mainstream processes and narratives and stuff, and because you're kind of busy and you're tired and expectations on your time increase, and you feel like you've got to work a bit harder, generate more income, and because you really want to do the best thing for your kids, it's kind of like there's this instinctive just sort of pull to just obligation to be the best parent you can be. And how, no matter how sort of abstract and philosophical and political, or however driven away from them you are, that gut feeling is always still there, and maybe there's some sort of guilt and so on involved in some of that as well, I don't know. And maybe that itself is part of the sort of social narrative and machinery that we live within. I mean, I think it's awful, the tragic feelings of people who find themselves not being able to have babies, for example. I mean, sort of trace back to perhaps early nomadic times, it probably wouldn't have made any difference because the babies were reared by the whole clan. But now there's this feeling of failure, and we're inadequate, we haven't had the perfect life, we haven't had the perfect career, the perfect family, we haven't raised 2.4 children plus dog, and it's a tragedy that the individuation of humans leads to this apparent sense of kind of failure, which I think is completely untrue and unfair. I think that as well leads to a hell of a lot of ill health, particularly when we've got the TV sort of giving us this sort of aspirational narrative. Who's it? Oh God, this comedian, Charlie Brooker, once said, he called them the chandeliers shagging anointed ones. Sort of in the 80s, everyone watching Dallas and Dynasty with these glitzy, shoulder-padded queens of the oil industry and stuff, and it's pumping this kind of like, look, you can be glitzy, you can be sexy, you can be exotic and glamorous, and you should want to be like these heroes and stuff. I mean, Christ, when I was growing up, I was given Commando. It was like a war magazine. It was literally all about killing Nazis, and the only German word I ever learned was two, Achtung and Schnell, because that's all you ever heard from these kind of the presenters of these sort of inhuman, just it was like the cowboys and Indians, the westerns back in the day, and it's just so many people shot off horses and stuff. You sort of just dehumanize them in a way. It's okay, they're just Indians, you know. And so I mean, there's all these sorts of post-war kind of post-imperial kind of archetypes drilled into our psyche when we were growing up about our prowess, our glory, what we've done for the kingdoms, what we've done for the Commonwealth, what we've how amazing our rulers are, and here's the evidence. We won 2 wars and a World Cup. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate Britain. I think it's a long and complicated history this island has, and there's so many things that have emerged from this soil that have been life-changing, globe-changing phenomena. Both philosophy, science, invention, music, arts, the whole thing. And so this isn't an anti-Britain or England crusade or anything like that. But it is a comment about this drilling that we've received to really just hand over the keys to the farm, essentially, to our landlords. I don't think there's a square inch of British soil that's kind of not owned. I mean, if it is, in inverted common ground, it's owned by the royal family or the Prince's Trust or the National Trust, which I think is still owned by Prince Charles or King Charles. So it's not like anyone can go off and build a sort of dissenters' territory in the New Forest. Some of the hippies tried it. It's sort of. And the police are more bothered about a bunch of hippies smoking weed in the New Forest than they are, I hate to say it, but paedophilia in the establishment and corruption, tax avoidance, people with their hands in the coffers. You can get onto COVID and things like that. I mean, it's just a trough. I mean, we're being led by a bunch of sort of public school toffs that couldn't give a fuck about ordinary human beings. They're not ordinary human beings. And they're just, if you've seen animals, I mean, they're just like pigs around a trough. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Right? Just echoes of Animal Farm there. And it's a con. We've been conned. We're wage slaves. We're debt slaves. Even our countries are fucking debt slaves. It's an economic model that's unsustainable. We promote GDP, gross domestic produce, and that's kind of a measure of how much shit's produced, how much it's sold for, and all this kind of stuff. And we regard that as a performance measure of a country. So we promote waste. We promote mindless, pointless, repetitive, brain-destroying labour tasks. We legalise alcohol, which, again, look at the ONS, look at the World Health Organization, just do a bit of digging on the internet and find the data that demonstrates with utter certainty that alcohol is the worst drug. More deaths, more suicides, more depression, more addiction, and we're talking low-functioning use of this drug as well. I mean, you can OD on it in a day. We legally purvey enough alcohol, and we know loads of kids can get in there with ID and sort of buy it when they're 15 and 16 and stuff. We're selling them vodka. I mean, you can kill yourself with a bottle of vodka, and this happens quite frequently. I mean, the numbers are there. And then compare that with the number of deaths due to, say, ecstasy. I mean, if you remember in the 90s when the whole rave scene was going off, which I've got loads of interesting thoughts about that, positive and negative. But I think that like sort of 1 or 2 people died every sort of few months while they're on ecstasy of dehydration. And my grandmother was like, "Oh, it's terrible, these hippies doing all these drugs and killing themselves." And I was like, Nana, you realise, X number of people, I mean, I don't know what it is, 100 a month, I don't know, 1,000, I don't know, on British roads, I say die. And she said, yeah, but they've got to get to work. I'm like, so, I'm saying, hang on, come on, look, take a step back, Nana, and think of the ethics of what you're saying here. You're saying it's okay for people to die en masse, right? So the sort of numbers we're talking about, the kind of numbers you'd expect to fall in a war, the numbers of people dying on the roads, right? But we just kind of accept that, integrate it within our understanding of the world, and say, yeah, that's okay. That's a risk worth taking, and it's a risk worth taking for what? Now let's think about what the majority of these people are doing. Most of them are going to work, right, or coming back from work. And what are those jobs? Well, I think we now know that the sort of the English economy, anyway, the British economy, is almost entirely service industry. So it's financial sector, kind of agencies, technology staff. So we're not talking about industries that build homes, educate our children, heal our people through health services. We're talking about kind of just a load of gas. You know, the finance sector moving money around from bank to insurance company to bank to policyholders to clients to brokers, sort of shuffling these sort of imaginary symbols around, which now even doesn't happen with money and with paper and metal. It's just all digits on screens. It's a kind of socially agreed sort of unspoken mystery that we all just subscribe to, and we're just born into it, and we all want it, but we kind of fear it, and we kind of don't want it because we want to transcend that and be better people, but we can't because we need it to pay the fucking bills, and we get into these kind of cyclic issues with it. I mean, of course, not everyone's afflicted by this stuff. I mean, personally, I'm a terrible money manager, because there's always been a part of me that just sort of thought, I don't want to kind of, my eyes have always glazed over when there's pound signs. I'm an analyst, I work in data and stuff, and whenever it got to the financy bits, I always sort of lose interest. When it's about patients and health outcomes and demographics, that's really fascinating, and you can do some really interesting math on it. But when it's about commissioning and bills and budgets and plans versus, it's just like, oh, can't someone else do that? It bores me. I don't want to be that person that's obsessed with accumulating wealth. I'd rather just kind of just play like Brazil. Brazil's approach to football is just, well, yeah, we might concede loads of goals because we play with like 8 men up front, right? But we're just going to have to score more. And that's always been my sort of approach. I just thought, well, look, I'm going to spend foolishly and wildly at times, and just I'm sort of fairly generous. I like to think I'm pretty generous, and so that just means I'm going to have to try and earn more and work harder, and sort of, so it's just kind of working hard and playing hard. But yeah, it's just about balances. But anyway, so I'm kind of going off a little bit off track there, and I need to sort of mix some of these recordings and so on. There's some other stuff to talk about. I mean, I think that one of the things that terrifies me the most, and always has done, I mean, I'd say I've got to the point where it doesn't terrify me now, because I've found a way of sort of living with this insight, which is the problem of being trapped in a narrative, right? And you can look at that in a number of different ways. You could say, well, imagine you're raised in a sort of doctor's family, and you've got like sort of 3 generations of really successful surgeons in the family, and it works with military and banking and all these other professions and stuff. And this is where some of the nepotism comes in, which we can talk about elsewhere. But there's probably a huge weight of expectation on that next generation to sort of go into doctoring and surgerying. And I can imagine being one of those people thinking, I don't want to do. Why should I be sort of dictated to in this way? And in a lot of cases, people kind of go off the rails a little bit, don't they? You look at their kind of upbringing. There's all this money and public schooling and training and preparation and ladies' colleges and sort of all that stuff, and then these people just kind of just say, nah, fuck that. I just have no. And so that refreshingly in a way as well, that that can happen, because it's like, no, I want to define myself. I want to just randomly stumble into what's happening to me, and just see what my response to the world is, instead of kind of prescribing a response to the world by having this plan that takes you into your 30s, right? And I know people personally that have sort of talked about this kind of existential struggle, and that's interesting. Where are we going? Oh, that's right. So the narrative. So that terrifies me, and then you can think about that more broadly and say, well, isn't there a whole kind of massive socio-cultural narrative going on, and there's these big movements of ideas around, So I'd say, things like football really big, religion's quite big. The sort of groups like music is quite big, and sort of subcultures there, and sort of certain professions and the kind of the attitudes and cultures and traditions that come with those are quite big. And so these are what I'm talking about when I mean kind of social narratives and attitudes and so on. And even that worries me. This is perhaps one of the reasons I shy from mainstream entertainment, because I think I don't want to. I don't want to be in that gang. They kind of look silly, and they're sort of celebrating silly things. And that said, I've watched bloody. I mean, because my girls love dance, right? So I've ended up watching Strictly Come Dancing, and I actually quite enjoy watching the dances, almost from a sort of technical, kind of choreographic point of view. And you try a few moves out myself at home, and it's and I actually quite like the music, and dance is freaking cool, man. It's I think it's a really honest and visceral art, and it's fantastic, right? But then at the same time, I find I struggle to get along with all the celebrity kind of glitz and all those grinning faces, and it's the buying into this sort of competition and I don't know. I just some of it just turns me off, but I do like the dance. So that's something that kind of it probably sounds a little bit teen angsty. I get it. It's probably possible to be a bit sixth form, but I'm being honest with you and saying it still sort of to this day afflicts me, the idea of being lost in a crowd and losing my own identity. When you think of those old sort of 1920s, 30s massive football matches, like sort of the up north, and everyone's wearing the same costume, same cap, that kind of thing terrifies me. So, well, that's interesting, isn't it? So one of the things I rail against, which is the obsession with individualism, I've just pretty much admitted that I'm afflicted by that too. In some sense, I want to be able to stand out from the crowd. I want to be able to say, well, I'm free in some way. And if I'm that suited and capped football supporter at Old Trafford, or wherever they played in the 20s, then I don't seem free there, because it looks like I'm just moving with a herd, and I don't want to be a herd animal. I'd rather be a wolf, right? Or some sort of rogue animal that doesn't live in the, or these kind of, these male lions. You get the male lion that sort of wins the women, right? There's a little part of me that wants to be that male lion and have the guaranteed girls, right? But there's another part of me that wants to be the rogue lion that kind of lives on the fringes of society and goes in and tries it on with the females occasionally and just sort of gets the odd win here and there and gets the odd decent meal here and there and stuff. But could at some point get just torn asunder by the alpha male and his brothers, right? So there's benefits in both of those worlds, right? And here again, herein lies the idea of connectedness, of even polar opposites, right? You think, well, north and south are the opposite pole, positive, negative, but these are essentially the same things, but just to different degrees. And that's something that I think we've forgotten. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've become so polarized in our political and philosophical thinking. Even I'm involved. We've seen materialism versus idealism. I'm involved in a polarized debate. That's an interesting insight. I think I'm going to leave it there for a bit. That's about an hour, I think, in total. So yeah, it's a bit meandering. I'm just curious to hear any thoughts about any of this. Cheers, guys. Bye.